Watch how I turn this Google image into this giant sugar cookie for my husband's Father's Day gift, and make sure you stay until the end to see his reaction. The base of this sugar cookie was huge. It was literally an 11 by 17. I don't often see giant decorated sugar cookies, so I really wanted to do something out of the box this time and build something that was reflective of Father's Day. The key to making the sugar cookie successful was definitely trying to get all of the angles as sharp as I possibly could and the dough as even as possible. And to make sure the sugar cookie keeps its shape while it's cooking, it's imperative to refrigerate or freeze the dough before it's baked. Because I moved the cookie, I tidied up the edges one more time to make sure it didn't fall out of shape when I baked it. Once the cookie was nice and even, I then proceeded to cutting out all of the shapes. When you're making a sugar cookie that has to be assembled, it is imperative to make sure that all of the cookies are the same thickness and that everything is measured to scale. It's very important to do this step ahead of time, which can be done with cardstock or just regular paper. You also need to account for the frosting that's going to go on each cookie, and if you're stacking the cookies, that's going to take from the overall space that is going to be used up when you assemble everything together. Now you might be able to see that my fingers are leaving an indentation inside of the dough. That's because sometimes my hands can be very hot and sometimes very cold. But if you tend to have hot hands, then you definitely want to make sure that your sugar cookie is cold and that you move as fast as possible to cut your sugar cookies. I'm using cardstock to cut out these shapes because I need the shapes to be much longer than normal sugar cookie cutters, and cardstock doesn't absorb moisture as quickly as regular paper does. Whenever you're decorating sugar cookies with royal icing, it is a very good idea to make sure you sift the powdered sugar first. This gets rid of all of the lumps so that your piping bag doesn't get stuck and you have to unclog it 100 times while you're trying to decorate. The basic recipe of royal icing is powdered sugar, egg whites or meringue powder, water, your choice of flavoring, and in this case I'm using corn syrup. Corn syrup gives the finished image a little shine, and it also makes the frosting a little bit softer to bite. I drew the cookie out entirely from freehand because of course there is no template that I could have used for this. I used blue icing to outline the cookie, which creates a dam, so when I use the flood icing stays inside of the dam, which doesn't allow it to spill over off the cookie. It's a good idea to sketch out what colors you want to go where so that you don't accidentally make a mistake during this process. I've seen people start out decorating their sugar cookie by lining it with the wrong color icing, and when they go to flood their cookie, that color shows through. And if you're trying to make a design that has one even cohesive look, it is not going to work if the colors are clearly bouncing off of each other. Another thing that you have to account for that can make or break your cookie design is the weather. Moisture and royal icing do not mix. If the air is moist and cool, it's going to take a very long time for your royal icing to dry. To combat this, you can use a dehumidifier to suck the moisture out of the air, and you can also use a fan that's designated just for your cookies. By blowing constant air onto the cookies, that will help them dry faster. You can also use a heater in the room. The heat will help draw the moisture out of the royal icing, making it dry even faster than using a fan. For the sides and the bottom of the pocket, I measured them out to be about 3/4 of an inch, giving me enough room to be able to put all 4 cookies inside of them without them being too packed. This is what I'm calling the royal icing painter's technique. I dabbed a paintbrush in water, took off the excess, and just dipped it inside of the royal icing and simply painted it on. So, for the tools. These in particular, I was not going for perfection. If you are making cookies to order, you want to make sure that your lines are as even as possible, of course, so that your customer gets the best quality they can. Here I made the mistake of not turning the cookie, and instead I went upward. To prevent this from happening to you, make sure you turn your cookie and make sure you can always see the line of royal icing that is coming down out of the piping bag onto the cookie. But here's a tip that you can keep in the back of your mind. When you make sugar cookies, pay close attention to the very edge of the sugar cookies and you will see a very faint brown line. You can use that brown line instead of drawing onto the cookie with like an edible marker. You can use that brown line as your natural outline. Just move slowly and guide the frosting along the outline, and I promise you'll be set. I was freestyling this ruler, but if you were to make a ruler and you wanted to make the lines as even as possible, this ruler right here is about 8 inches. What you should do is break 8 down into 4 even lines of 2, and then you will go in between those lines with lines of 4. This will create your inches and centimeters evenly placed apart. As crazy as it is, I decided to go with this design a little bit more than 24 hours before Father's Day. And for anybody that knows anything about royal icing, especially in this kind of climate that we're in upstate New York, like the ability for it to dry in time is absolutely wildly ambitious. But I went for it because with the fan and with putting heat into the room, I figured that I could try to make it dry as fast as possible, and it literally worked. You may have noticed that I'm not using outlining frosting to make a dam around the outsides first. What I'm doing is using icing that's a little bit thicker so that I can just work with it and allow it to dry as I go along. Sometimes royal icing is referred to in seconds, meaning the frosting that I'm using right now is about 13-second frosting, which means that it takes about 13 seconds for the design that I pipe in to fully settle. Knowing the different consistencies of royal icing and what they're used for can really help in decorating your cookies. It takes a lot longer to outline every single cookie versus being able to just use the frosting to just flood the cookie and continue moving on from there. You may have also noticed that I'm using pretty much the same colors in each cookie to make sure that everything looks like it's a part of the same set. Always be realistic with your time and with your designs. For me, I was not working with a lot of time, so I kept all of the designs as basic as possible while just adding a little bit of detail along the way to make the overall look just pop a little bit more. To make the decorating process a little bit easier, I'm using the wet on wet technique, which you see here. To make the definition in the hammerhead show, I needed to dry it in between sets before I added a little more, which is the same thing I did with the end of this wrench. And if you look closer to the hammer, it has a two-tone color that makes it look a little bit more realistic. For the pocket, I didn't want a lot of the sugar cookie to show, so I just went ahead and painted over it to cover up some of that raw cookie. And because I didn't feel like piping everything onto it, I just dumped the rest of the frosting on and flattened everything out with a spatula. I also wanted a little bit of texture inside the pocket, so I used the scribe tool to just create squiggly lines for the sides and for the bottom. I almost forgot to put the stitches on before I added the pockets. I am so glad I remember this step, but check out how the stitching really helps bring this to life. I decided to add black dots up there instead of silver because adding silver would literally just create an extra step that I really didn't want to take, so I just took that out and used what I had. Now it's time to glue the pocket on, and let me tell you, royal icing is one of the best mediums that you can use for glue. If you're ever in need of a royal icing to dry as fast as possible, then use indirect heat, such as a hairdryer or a heat gun from about 18 to 20 inches away. A fan will also help with drying the icing, but just make sure it's stabilized so that it doesn't fall over onto your cookies. I have a ceiling fan and a box fan that I use for these cookies, so I left it on there for about 30 minutes because I didn't want to risk the pocket lid shifting or the cookies that are going to go underneath it to smush or indent easily when I'm putting them inside the pocket. If you found this cookie tutorial helpful, make sure you give it a like. Please subscribe to help my channel grow, and remember, you can win $250 just for subscribing. Send this video to your father or someone that you think will like it, and make sure you let me know in the comments what video you would like to see next.